Good morning. My name is Jay Rosenthal, and I'm the Managing Director of Business of Cannabis. Welcome to the Cannabis Daily Show for Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. Since 2017, Business of Cannabis has highlighted the companies, brands, people, and trends driving the cannabis industry. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and always feel free to visit us at businessofcannabis.com, as well as through all of our social channels, including Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe. After the rundown of the key stories we're following, we'll get to our BofC Live segment today, where we'll be joined by Kelly Beker. She is the co-founder and executive director of the Cannabis Education Guild. The Cannabis Education Guild is a platform focused on global cannabis education and social good. We will talk to her about all of that. Of note, we, Business of Cannabis, are nominated for an Cannabis Award for the best news source. There's a link below, and you can go find out how to vote for us, and we hope that you do as well. In September, we will be back in New York for Business of Cannabis New York. That is September 22nd and 23rd. Information about that event is also in the link below. For today's top stories, cannabis stocks suffering as DC moves at a snail's pace. Revised Canadian cannabis sales figures for 2021. Financing activity is plummeting in cannabis. Why Canadian cannabis prices are down despite inflation. And Canadian cannabis producers see a slight uptick in the corporate reputation survey. For our first story, shares of some of the largest MSOs such as Curaleaf, Green Thumb Industries, and Trulieve have dropped more than 30% this past year, writes Bloomberg. The slow pace of federal legalization, which still feels really far off, is to blame, say analysts, quote, cannabis, with its many federal and state regulatory restrictions still in place, has been driven into recession by slow-moving policy changes. That, according to the BTIG analyst Camilo Lyon in a research note on April 26th. The SAFE Banking Act or other federal legislative reform could change the game, but there are obstacles. Well, Republicans will likely win control of the Senate this year. Just 4 Republicans voted for the MORE Act in April. Biden's administration has expressed desire to reduce cannabis consumption in its first drug control strategy. But Biden's recent commutations, which included several cannabis-related convictions, that's a very small glimmer of hope. Quote, decriminalization is so important to this industry. That's from Bloomberg intelligence analyst Kenneth Shea. And the can keeps getting kicked down the line. For our second story, each week Business of Cannabis delivers a series of insights from our partners at Cannabis Benchmarks. Today, they look at Statistics Canada's recently released retail sales data for February 2022, showing nationwide legal cannabis sales dropping from the previous month due to fewer total days of the month. Sales in February slid to 336.4 million Canadian, but increased on a daily basis. From January to February, daily sales grew from an average of 11.2 million per day to 12 million per day, or a 7.5% increase. After relatively flat daily sales over the past 6 months, average daily sales grew per day for the first time. You can see the full briefing on our website at businessofcannabis.com. For our third story, cannabis capital raises have dropped 67% in 2022 compared to 2021, according to Viridian Capital Advisors' latest newsletter. Here are some of the statistics. In Canada, equity raises are down 94%, and in the US, they're down 73%. Debt financing has also dropped in Canada 86%, but it's up 72%, adding up to an overall decrease of 33% in the US. The reason for equity declines? Well, the aforementioned low valuations at the top. The MSO ETF, for example, is down 40% year to date. Quote, no CFO wants to sell stock at such low prices, particularly if there is still any glimmer of hope that a positive legislative result could produce an upside catalyst. This, according to Frank Colombo. But why hasn't debt financing filled the gap in capital raises? Well, according to Viridian, MSOs, they don't need it. They've had healthy cash balances. Quote, if analyst consensus is correct, the companies on this chart can internally fund their needs for 2022 and 2023, particularly given their healthy current balance sheets. If you want to see the graph Viridian is talking about, head to our website at businessofcannabis.com. It is there. For our fourth story, inflation is sending prices up for everything except cannabis. According to the Globe and Mail here in Canada, which blamed high inventories and a desperate race to win market share. Here are some of the numbers. Adult use prices are down 8.3% since last year. Medical prices are even down further to 10.2%. And since 2018, prices have dropped about 25%. Inflation hit 6.7% in March, which is the highest it's been since 1991. Quote, a lot of public companies are selling at a loss, and they're able to do that because they just keep tapping into the markets to bring in cash and then keep selling this, according to the Senior VP of Finance at Aurora. For our final story, cannabis companies are some of the least reputable businesses, according to Canadians, per Quebec market research firm Legalize surveys of more than 300 companies, this in MJ Biz Daily. Here are some of the rankings. With some Cannabis Connections shoppers, Drug Mart was ranked number 1. Edmonton-based Aurora was down at 180, and Canopy Growth was ranked at 186. China's Huawei and Montreal's scandal-plagued SNC-Lavalin were at the bottom. But it's a small improvement to previous survey results and don't indicate that Canadians disapprove necessarily of cannabis. Instead, Leger's executive VP Dave Schultz said that they are simply not very well known. Quote, the big factor is people just don't know them. That awareness piece is huge in the reputation world. You look at Aurora, which has the highest rating, only 42% of Canadians say they're even aware of them. Those are the stories we're watching today. Join 12,000 others and catch all these stories and more in your inbox every day at 7 a.m. Eastern with our Cannabis Daily newsletter. Coming up on our BofC Live, a conversation with Kelly Beker. She is the co-founder and executive director at the Cannabis Education Guild. She joins us on BofC Live from Mexico City, where she's working on efforts to legalize cannabis in that country, but she'll also be providing perspective on ESG and social impact in the cannabis sector. This is Kelly Beker. Kelly Beker, thanks for being here.
Hola, thanks for having me.
Hola, Kelly. I was just looking back of when you were last on Business of Cannabis. Three things of note. One, it was before COVID. That's the first thing.
Different time. Okay.
Second, you were in Cambodia. Does that sound right?
Yeah, correct. Now I'm in
And
Mexico.
we were talking about cannabis then too. Obviously, it was on Business of Cannabis. Anything happened between then and now? No, I'm just kidding.
No,
Well, where are
nothing
you
really.
now? Talk about that.
So I'm currently in Ciudad de Mexico. That's what they call Mexico City. I honestly am shocked by how much I love this city. And it's definitely where all the action's happening in every industry, and certainly cannabis, because they keep sort of saying legalization's any day now here. So there's a lot of exciting movement happening.
I know I speak for many in the Canadian cannabis family. When are you coming home, if ever?
It's a great question. You're not the only one asking me. I would say like in a good month or so, a few projects to wrap up here and see them through. And then I'll be back maybe for Cannabis. That would be nice.
Okay. That's like June 1st, 2nd, 3rd or something. So
yeah, like I've got to get a lot of stuff done.
Honing in, get the flights ready. Let us know if you need a ride from the airport. We'll get you all set up, Kelly. Last time we talked, I think we also mentioned the Cannabis Education Guild. You are launching a new course, if I'm not mistaken, about ESG. Talk about what's going on with the Cannabis Education Guild and what we can look forward to.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's crazy to think, Jay, that was in 2019 when Jen, Larry, and I started the Guild. And since then, we've been able to educate companies, partners across Canada. A lot of the partners we work with are LPs or retailers, but mostly trade agencies, because our courses are really focused on understanding the commercial landscape, and a lot of people in the trade space are coming from other CPG sectors, so they don't understand necessarily commercial cannabis. We've also had the opportunity to educate groups live and virtually across Asia, and like Thailand, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, as well as India, the UK, the US, and now Mexico.
It's a lot of travel.
It's a lot. It definitely COVID slowed it down and made it more virtual. But yeah, our online learning platform has been very helpful for the industry, and very excited to announce that myself and a few others have put together an ESG course to talk about sort of social impact, environmental issues, governance issues, and sort of why this matters now. And I think, I had thoughts of this coming out before COVID, and I think now with supply chains being very exposed and there being so many issues with logistics and things needing to be sourced more locally, this matters more than ever. So we're excited for that to come out in a few months. And if you follow the Cannabis Education Guild, you'll get all the updates.
Well, we'll put how to follow that as this gets posted. Kelly, I want to ask you a question because we see, I think, almost two or many angles coming at this. We have, let's call in the broad rubric of ESG. We have companies doing more because they believe it is at their core around social responsibility, social impact. We have investors, some investors pushing companies to say, let us know what you're doing around ESG. Mm-hmm. However, maybe the most impactful, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is regulators who are saying, you need to do this or you cannot operate. It's actually part of the regulatory framework in which you're operating. Talk a bit about sort of what you're seeing in all those jurisdictions, and maybe even in Canada, around sort of the push towards understanding and reporting your social impact as a company.
Yeah, you nailed it. Those are the buckets. And I think that it starts with the regulations and the government, and actually like the UN doing something about it, because if companies are not incentivized, they might have a very solid CSR team, which we're now seeing is like an outdated term, and that's sort of not going to be enough. So they need the incentive to really feel like they need to report and they need to invest in audits or whatever it may be to show more transparency and ethical operations. Another group I would also add, Jay, is the conscious consumer. There's this movement, which, I always say, like, Nike didn't make a plastic shoe because they wanted to, or fair trade was not a certificate until the 80s when people pushed for it. Like, the conscious consumer movement is growing, especially since COVID. So I think that group and the cannabis community and the cannabis culture is very mindful, and we hear from bud tenders across Canada that like they are getting asked these questions. And when there have been a few different scandals come up with whether it was product or packaging or labor relations in the Canadian industry, they're not even really sure how to answer. So that's something that we like to discuss with the trade agencies about, messaging around this and why this matters. And I definitely think that it has to come as a multi-pronged approach. So from the consumer level, from the industry side, but definitely from a top-down point from the government and the regulatory bodies. Yes.
And are there companies doing interesting work, good work? And obviously there's more work to be done sort of across the board, but what are you seeing, especially as it relates to sort of supply chains? Because you've been talking about this for a very long time, about ethical supply chains and ending slavery and other supply chains. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that can be eye-opening for an industry that is about to go sort of through worldwide trade.
Yeah, I would say that some, especially on the hemp side, are doing a pretty good job. I think that we know hemp to be not a hippie crop, but a crop that's here to help people on the planet, whether it's our health or the clothes we wear, or what it's going to do for the soil, and all of our hopeful ideals for hemp. I think that there are some really great hemp companies that are actually being very transparent on their website, with their investors, what they're doing, where they're sourcing from, because we're sourcing so much of it still from developing countries. So knowing that your factories are ethical, knowing that you're receiving product that's tested and clean, like they're doing a really good job in hemp. In cannabis, I would say it's still kind of new. We've seen some companies in Canada and the US put out like an ESG report, and that's great. And that means they're investing in audits and going, extra measures to sort of change their operations. But I would also say that doesn't necessarily equate to impact. And I think that will only last for so long. Like, it will be trendy to do some sort of ESG report, but it won't actually be, quantitative enough or qualitative enough that people are seeing an impact in what these companies are doing. And what I also am very familiar with the fashion industry. I work in fashion as well. Like, fashion supply chains are backpedaling and they can only make promises for like 2030, 2035 that they'll reduce their carbon emissions by 5%. I hope that the cannabis industry, because it's in its infancy, can make maybe less grandiose of promises but more realistic changes. Sorry, we're in Mexico.
I love it. Well, it's funny because I'm on Bloor Street in Toronto, and we have a similar sound sometimes when our windows are open. Kelly, so can we actually shift because of the siren? But you're also in Mexico City. We've had a couple folks on talking about Mexico as a market, Mexico as an emerging market. Talk a little bit about sort of your experience down there and where you think it is. You talked about it at the top, like where it is on the timeline of this being a reality in Mexico.
It's very obviously complicated here for reasons I don't need to say. There are a lot of people who believe it's going to happen in less than a year, and then say the other camp believes that it will be when the next president comes into power or when this one is like ending his term. So it's sort of, I would say, in a 1 to 3 year timeline is just my guess. But I have to say, it's kind of like being in Canada 7 years ago when everyone's getting really innovative and finding these gray areas to work around. And how can we educate people now and start to destigmatize? Something fabulous that one of the doctors here has done is launched the first endocannabinoid system and like full comprehensive cannabis course at the top med school in Mexico, and it's available online in English. So Ethan Rousseau and Vincent Maida and like a bunch of doctors contributed to this course. So I think that was really, it just launched this month. So last month, I think it's really great that Mexico is actually showing like, no, we care about medical as well. And this is what we're doing to educate, Latin American market and also international countries because it's available in English. There's some cannabis cafes where you can get like a CBD beverage or maybe like a Delta 8. Yeah,
sure.
They're finding creative ways to work around it.
That sounds like any number of US states too, frankly.
True, exactly. And I think that it's going to be unique to any other market because they've had such a serious legacy market here, and they also have indigenous uses and purposes. So it will be massive when it happens. I just hope that, from conversations I've had with a lot of industry leaders here, that they do it differently than, let's say, avocado, coffee, tea, other crops here. It looks a little more promising because some people believe on the corporate side, like in order to garner trust, that other countries will want to import Mexican products. They'll have to go above and beyond to show transparency. So that's sort of promising. And it's interesting, Jay, because having the conversation about like a slavery-free cannabis industry in Europe or Canada, the US, it's like very uncomfortable for most. We don't really want to think about those things, where our raw materials come from and why they're so cheap. But here, it's a very open dialogue because they all have family who are farmers. They know people in avocados and lemons and the problems that come up in these supply chains. So they're very much like, yeah, we need to make sure cannabis is different. So it's very refreshing, muy fresco.
I like it. Thank you for your time today. I was going to say we'll connect with you down the road, and we will, but it may not be in this format as folks who've been following along understand. But Kelly, thank you. I want you to travel safe, get back, and we will see you hopefully in June when you arrive safely back in Toronto. Thank you for your time, your insight, and for the work you're doing. We look forward to seeing you down the road.
Thanks, Jay. And I just want to mention that I will be hosting Ganja yoga classes online, available at the CEG website to sign up as of next week. So stay tuned if you want to join us for some bliss and namaste.
I want to. I will sign up right now. Great. We'll put a link to that as well as we post this. Kelly, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Great talking to you, Jay. Bye.
That was episode 74 of the Cannabis Daily Show. Thank you for joining us here on YouTube or wherever you caught the program. Please do subscribe, and we will see you tomorrow.